You grew up here in the U.S., but of course your family is from Colombian heritage and descent. Like, tell us, like, how were you raised? Were you raised in a household that were educators or that worked white collar or blue collar trade jobs? Like, how did you get raised from your family that got you to lead into a background of education?
Right. So both of my parents have worked as teachers. My mother is a teacher still. And in fact, I studied economics for my bachelor's degree. I looked for work in some of the cities around here, but ended up getting my first teaching job at a private school. After that, I went overseas. But yeah, I guess you could say it's kind of a career that I saw as a path because of my family. I didn't anticipate becoming a teacher. And specifically when I was an undergraduate in university, I didn't anticipate traveling overseas as young as I ended up doing so. I had at one time planned on doing study abroad. It didn't happen. But yeah, I finished my bachelor's degree, and that first degree allowed me to begin teaching and also allowed me to begin teaching overseas. So for any young person, having a bachelor's degree is kind of the first step to making a career out of teaching.
Absolutely. So you gotta get that BA as the first step in the direction if you want to be in any form of education or teaching. Definitely shout out to even your mom and dad. You said, Sebastian, are both educators or just mom?
My father has taught as a teacher of language and art teacher, but he had his career in sales. So okay. Yeah, he's a fine arts painter and did teach drawing and painting as well.
Okay, so definitely an artisan and an educator, but we always give big ups to the parents that are educators. My mom, she came from a technology background and then converted into education. So she's one of the ones that even got me into working in education and after school youth development. And so always give a big up to the parents who are educators out there, because it definitely is a hard and arduous job from then until now. And so we always celebrate the educators on the RTJ show. But Wisdom audience, if you're listening, if you have any questions for Sebastian, feel free to come on to the stage at any point of today's session to ask any questions. We are kicking off our live Q&A portion of today's episode. And shout out to any of our Twitter Space listeners that are tuning in. But Sebastian, let's start from like your college education. Did you go to school for education? Did you start off with a new major or a new career field that you wanted to minor or major in and then pivot into education? So like, what was your story when you first went to college? Did you go for education or did you pivot?
I took the path of least resistance, and coming from high school, I had a couple AP credits in math and econ. So that's how I got into the economics department. And that major was only 10 courses, and I finished it quite easily. I took more classes overall, courses in the music department. I didn't double major because if I had double majored, then I wouldn't have been able to apply all of the performance music courses to my bachelor's degree. So yeah, I finished in 3.5 years. And besides majoring in economics, I got my master's in teaching English from the New School in New York City. So kind of to fill in the gap between the time I graduated and the time I started my master's, I went to Colombia and I was teaching there briefly. Really wasn't making ends meet. Teaching in Latin America, incomes are very low for teachers. So plus there's, there are people who study English who are from those countries who also teach. So the market isn't as competitive for foreign teachers of English in Latin America or Central America or the Caribbean. And, you know, besides having taken the path of least resistance, I got some of my very good ideas to continue in this career path from my friends. So I had a friend from England, and she encouraged me to get a teaching certificate. And I went to London. I was there taking a part-time teaching certificate course, and I had a wonderful stay. I was there for about 3 months. And so studying part-time was about 12 hours a week. And being in London allowed me to see lots of museums. The museums are free, and I loved it. So that was really a really special time. One of my classmates in that program, and I should say there are many options for getting a teaching certificate. Past the bachelor's degree, the next step to teaching overseas would be to get a TEFL certificate, teaching English to speakers of other languages. And there are two that are kind of neck and neck for prestige. There's the Trinity TESOL and Cambridge CELTA, and that's Certificate of English Language Teaching to Adults. So I got the Cambridge CELTA. That is under Cambridge University, but it is offered at language institutes pretty much all around the world. Not so much in the United States because it is a British credential, but it is widely regarded as kind of the entry-level certificate for generally Europe and Asia. People from Australia will also get this credential, or New Zealand, for instance. Past the CELTA is the Delta. It's a diploma instead of certificate. Many schools, even universities, would consider it like a master's, but really it's much shorter, less money, takes some less time perhaps than a master's degree. But from England, a friend of mine was going to teach in South Korea. So that was my next step. And I went and I taught in South Korea in Daegu for 1 year. And at the end of the year was back in the United States and attended a TESOL conference in New Orleans. So International TESOL Association is a group for professional development for teachers around the world of English, and they have a conference every year. So I attended in New Orleans after teaching a year in South Korea, and I found out about the New School program, the MA in TESOL, and that same summer I started in New York City at the New School, and I did several courses in the summer, and then I went back to South Korea in the fall to continue teaching in South Korea and finish the master's degree. So in South Korea in my second year, I finished my master's degree, and at the end of that time, I had more options. I had the option to stay and continue at the same school, or change to a business school, or like a teaching business English, or go, for instance, to a university and teach at a university. It happened that I returned to the United States after doing a little bit of travel. From South Korea, I was able to travel to Japan 2 or 3 times, traveled to Thailand, Cambodia, and at the end of the stay there, I did a 1-month temple stay in a temple in South Korea. That was really a nice experience. And then I traveled to the Philippines. And after a vacation to the Philippines, well, then I went back to the United States and began looking for work in the US. And there are types of programs that are called intensive English programs, IEPs, at universities, where students are admitted to the school pending completion of a pre-college English program. So I was working at one briefly, didn't stay. I had a friend from my master's program who was teaching in Vietnam. So I went to Vietnam, and leaving the United States for Vietnam, I stayed there for 5 years. And I mean, this is where the story gets more interesting. In South Korea, schools will bring teachers from overseas, paying for the flight and, you know, subsidizing accommodation. But going to another country like Vietnam, you as a professional have to kind of pay your way. So you find out where you want to be. And I went to Ho Chi Minh City and got started with a great daytime teaching position. Give you a little background, there are many types of schools. So it was my first time teaching at a public school in Vietnam, and I taught middle school age students, and it was a push-in program. So it was nice because it was daytime. Many other schools are evenings and weekends. They're language academies. And so, you know, typically if you're going to South Korea, like I did, you would teach evening classes and weekend classes. Also in Vietnam, there are many schools that are that type of schedule where it's a language institute. You teach evenings and weekends. So, you know, it's difficult. And for a young person, it's okay. If you have a family, that kind of schedule might be unacceptable. But I actually ended up teaching daytime when I arrived to Vietnam, doing push-in at a public school. I supplemented the work with other classes. In some moments, I had 2 jobs at the same time, a full-time and a part-time. In Vietnam, I met my wife. We married. We applied for her tourist visa. It was denied. We had a child, our son, and we applied for her immigrant visa. And then we went to the United States together as a family in 2019. And my son was 1 year old. So kind of like my story where I was born in Colombia. My mother's from the United States, and my parents came to the US together with me when I was 1. And actually, I'm an only child. My son's an only child as well. And so we're in the United States, and I teach public school. I also teach online to students in Panama through English language programs, which is a public affairs project of the United States Department of State. The United States Department of State has this group kind of fellowships. Some of these public affairs programs include, for instance, Fulbright. They include this English language programs. Of course, the Peace Corps is under this group. And so there are overseas teaching fellowships as a fellow or as a specialist. And then there's also what's called virtual educator. And so I began that during the pandemic in 2020, teaching to students in Panama. And actually, I continue doing that today. So it is a second job that I have. And my students in Panama are studying for language exams like TOEFL, also for entrance exams like SAT and GRE. And I also coach them on writing the personal statement. And so some of those students, you know, they get the dream scholarship to study abroad. And that's been really a great